All right, let's talk about one of history's absolute weirdest moments, the Great Emu War of 1932. You've probably seen the memes, but trust me, the real story is somehow even stranger and a whole lot funnier.
You've definitely seen these memes, right? They make it sound like this epic, grim, post-apocalyptic showdown. Australian soldiers, haunted eyes, staring into the middle distance, forever traumatized by emu death squads. It's always portrayed as this really dark, serious war.
Okay, but what if that whole version is just completely wrong? The reality? It wasn't some gritty war movie. It was more like a Benny Hill sketch, seriously. The real story isn't about some epic military blunder against birds. It's a story about pure desperation, a bit of political showmanship, and just a massive, massive misunderstanding of the natural world.
So let's get into it. How on earth did an entire army find itself declared at war with a bunch of birds?
And here's the crazy part. The basic idea in the memes, it's actually true. The Australian government really did send out soldiers from the Royal Australian Artillery, and their official mission, I kid you not, was to fight a bunch of emus. But to get why this happened, you have to realize this was never just a straightforward military operation.
Yeah, to really understand the why, we have to zoom out. This story doesn't start with soldiers. It starts with a country in deep, deep trouble.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1932. We're in the absolute depths of the Great Depression. In Australia, things were particularly bad. The unemployment rate hit a staggering 32%. The whole country was, to put it mildly, on its knees.
See, after World War I, Australia gave thousands of its veterans land to become farmers, especially out in Western Australia. The problem was, this was not great land. It was marginal, tough to farm even when things were good. So when the Depression smashed the global economy, wheat prices just fell through the floor. These guys, these soldiers, who had survived the horrors of the trenches in Europe, were now about to lose everything.
And here's the thing. The situation was already a mess before a single emu even set foot on their land. A government report from 1929, 3 years earlier, had already said these settlement programs were a total failure. So these farmers were pretty much set up for disaster from the get-go. And just when you think it can't get any worse, that's when the emus show up. We're talking about an estimated 20,000 of them. They were migrating because of a drought, and they stumbled upon this giant, all-you-can-eat buffet of wheat fields. For these farmers who were already hanging on by a thread, this was it. This was the final straw.
So the farmers are desperate. They plead for help. And the government, well, the government sends in the army. And this is the exact moment where this very real human tragedy pivots and becomes, well, an absolute farce.
So let's look at the tail of the tape here. In this corner, you've got the Australian Army, represented by one Major G.P.W. Meredith, 2 soldiers, a couple of heavy Lewis machine guns, and 10,000 rounds of ammo. And in the other corner, 20,000 emus who, it turns out, were basically born for guerrilla warfare.
The first attempt was just one failure after another. It's almost comical. They try to ambush the emus at a dam, the gun jams. Okay, new plan, let's mount a machine gun on a truck and chase them down. Well, the ride was so bumpy, the gunner couldn't land a single shot. After just 6 days of this, and with the newspapers having an absolute field day, the army just gives up. They retreat. The only casualty was their pride.
The emus were just too good at being emus. I mean, even the man in charge, Major Meredith, had to give them credit. He said they could face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. He was basically saying they weren't just fighting dumb birds, they were fighting a perfectly evolved survival machine.
Okay, so why? Why did this go so spectacularly wrong? Let's do a little post-mortem on this whole fiasco.
And, there's a difference between a mistake and a total failure, right? A mistake is just getting something wrong. A failure is when what you did produces absolutely zero positive results. And let's be honest, by any definition, the Emu War was a failure.
The numbers alone tell you everything you need to know. Look, they even tried a second time. And during this supposedly more successful round, they fired almost 10,000 bullets to kill less than 1,000 emus. That's a rate of 10 bullets for every single bird. For trained soldiers with machine guns, that is just stunningly bad. So it really all boils down to these 5 huge miscalculations. First, they had no clue about ecology. They were treating migratory animals like they were just sitting ducks. Second, they used World War I tactics on targets that move like the wind. Third, let's face it, this was partly a PR stunt for the defense minister. Fourth, their gear, the guns, the trucks, was totally wrong for the job. And fifth, and this is the big one, they just completely, utterly underestimated the emu.
But out of all this embarrassment and failure, a legacy was born. And in the end, you could say the emus really did get the last laugh.
So since the army couldn't do it, the government finally tried something that actually made sense. A bounty system. No more soldiers, no more machine guns. They just started paying the local farmers a small fee for every emu. And what happened? It worked. This simple, low-cost solution was way more effective. We're talking over 57,000 bounties paid in just 1 year.
And that really brings the whole story full circle, doesn't it? The emu, a national icon that was officially declared a pest, eventually became a protected species. It's a perfect symbol of how Australia's whole view of its own amazing and, yeah, often misunderstood wildlife has changed over time.
So back to the big question. Did Australia actually lose a war to a bunch of birds? Well, no, because it was never really a war. It was a really poorly thought out pest control mission that the newspapers, even at the time, called out for the joke that it was. But the real story, the one that's more than just a meme, teaches us a much bigger lesson. It's about what happens when we try to solve a complex, natural problem with simple, brute force. And it's a timeless and, yeah, pretty funny reminder about getting a little too arrogant when we're dealing with Mother Nature.